The impact Street Fighter II had as a whole on the gaming industry cannot be understated. Released in the arcades in 1991, Street Fighter II revolutionized the video game world with a new approach to how a competitive game should work. You've heard this before, right? I mean, it's been echoed through pop culture, and for good reason. This game laid the groundwork for the fighting game genre as a whole and would go on to inspire, well, a lot of games. And I mean, a lot. Yeah, whatever fighting game you're playing or learning now wouldn't exist without Street Fighter II. After Street Fighter II's success, Capcom now sees that they just established a new genre of games, continued to improve Street Fighter II, and put into production multiple fighting games. As the years went on, they wanted to take the next step into making a true successor to Street Fighter II. But Capcom had no idea what to do for that title. Back in the 90s, they ran their business in a really interesting way. After Street Fighter II was waning down, that team moved on to make the Street Fighter Alpha series. Other members of the team moved on to make the Darkstalker series of games. Another team went on to create what we know as Capcom just made a lot of fighting games. But after all these games, there was still no Street Fighter 3. It doesn't mean they weren't trying. Capcom was looking for a developer to make Street Fighter 3, and in 1994, Tomoshi Sadamoto, the director of The King of Dragons, was developing a new IP that would go under the working title New Generation. This was going to be an original fighting game with sci-fi characters. At the time, one of the artists of the game was looking over Sadamoto's initial concept and thought to himself,
"You know, they're probably going to want to turn this into a Street Fighter game anyway."
Guess what happened? So, that team was put on board to make Street Fighter 3, New Generation. This game would utilize the Capcom System 3 arcade hardware, otherwise known as CPS3, and it went through a very troubled development period. A majority of the team didn't join development until around the third year because there was a structural change going on at Capcom. They were to assign a producer to every project instead of Yoshiki Okamoto being head producer. Street Fighter 3's team was mostly composed of new talent, in which 70 to 80% of the team members had no experience making fighting games. And most of the team that did have experience that came to work on Street Fighter 3 that year were mostly Darkstalkers veterans. The original SF2 team either left the company or was still working on the alpha games. So it was already a really tough and long process. Many of the known mechanics didn't get added until late into development. But with everything said and done, Street Fighter was ready to step into the new generation. In 1997, multiple people came to the arcade to see what was the next step for Street Fighter, and were greeted by a machine that just said 3 on it. And their response?
This game's dumb, I wanna go play Pokemon.
Ew, Street Fighter 3, I'ma just stick to Mappy.
Boring. Hey yo, Tekken though.
Get this Street Fighter out of here. I need my Virtua Fighter.
Street Fighter 3? More like shitfucker P.
Location tests for Street Fighter 3 didn't go well. They got a lot of negative feedback, with the most common complaint being,
"Where the fuck is Ryu and Ken?"
The cast of New Generation was all newcomers. This didn't bode well for fans because they become attached to the Street Fighter 2 cast. I mean, with all the different iterations that Capcom was coming out with, and comparing this to the alpha games, who wouldn't be? The gameplay also felt a little weird. While the devs made mechanics for casuals to pick up the game, it only raised the barrier for entry, which created a difficulty stigma around the gameplay. On the official release of Street Fighter 3, they added Ryu and Ken, but that wasn't enough. Street Fighter 3 didn't sell very well, and not a lot of people were playing it. Unless your name was Tamara and you star in a hit reality ABC sitcom.
Wait, I was on the softball team. Well, until I quit to be a cheerleader. But I quit that to devote more time to breaking my Street Fighter 3 record.
Shame too, because it's an interesting and experimental game the more you dig into it. Like, there were transitional stages, and the sprite work was amazing. However, in the late 90s, while the detailed sprite work was nothing to scoff at, many were disappointed that they didn't take the 3D approach, as most of the popular fighting games at that time took that and ran fully with it. So, what was next? Well, create a sequel, of course. Second Impact Giant Attack came out the exact same year, 6 months after New Generation. It was a huge improvement over New Generation and changed some characters' movesets, added new ones, and 2 new characters joined the fight. These 2 is where the name Giant Attack comes from, because they were big characters. Second Impact was also one of the first fighting games, or games in general, to add a native 16:9 widescreen support. And this mode actually shaked up the gameplay by changing matchup knowledge between characters. While Second Impact had more fans this time around because of its refined gameplay, it wasn't successful either. Street Fighter III wasn't the colossal hit Capcom wanted or needed, especially in comparison to Street Fighter II. After these 2 failures, now what? Well, the Capcom team went back to the drawing board. This time, they took 2 years to fully realize Street Fighter III. They studied what worked and what didn't work for the game. One of the decisions was putting Hidetoshi Ishizawa as lead designer. They had one shot, one more opportunity to seize everything they wanted out of Street Fighter III. And in 1999, came back with one of the greatest fighting games ever made. Street Fighter III Third Strike was released in the arcades in 1999 under Capcom's CPS-3 arcade board. As the third and last iteration of the Street Fighter III series, it contained refined balancing, new mechanics, and a modern feel that makes it the definitive entry in the series. Fundamentally, Third Strike has Street Fighter mechanics, but the new mechanics added in the 3 series created its own unique flavor. The mechanics of Street Fighter III feel different from what has been usually established. In previous Street Fighters, footwork revolved around the position of both players, and what attacks players can use in order to hit or punish if their opponent made the wrong choice. This is called footsies. Movement still revolves around footsies in 3, but dashing and backdashing was added. This speeds up the gameplay as now players can make decisions to get in and out of situations quicker. Every single addition to the Street Fighter III series shaped it into a beast of its own, while innovating future fighting games that we know today. One feature that Second Impact added are EX moves. By pressing 2 buttons, you can do a more powerful version of your special move that gives it new properties, combo potential, and uses a part of your meter. Super arts have been a thing in the later versions of Street Fighter II and Alpha, but 3 gave the player the decision to pick from multiple super arts. There's 3 for each character, so a player can choose which one fits their playstyle. One of the newest changes to Third Strike is how throws work. Originally, throws were inputted by a player pressing forward heavy punch when they were close to the opponent. Sometimes this would confuse certain players, or heavy punch would just come out depending on the distance between opponents. Throws were given their own separate inputs, light punch and light kick, and they're much easier to execute. More animations were added so if the throw whiffs, you would be able to tell. This new input also led to an emergent mechanic called Kara throwing. Now a Kara throw is when a character uses the startup animation of a particular move, but then cancels it into a throw. This throw comes out slower, but the character moves forward slightly, giving you the ability to perform a throw from a longer distance. There's so much to go over in mechanics, but these next few are my favorites. A character action is performed by pressing both heavy punch and heavy kick, but it's not just a funny little taunt to throw off your opponents. Depending on the character, it will buff them considerably based on their different attributes. Their attack power increases, more stun damage, extra defense, and what have you. Not only are taunts fun ways to get into your opponent's head, but they also invoke fear in this game due to the fact that you just got buffed from taking a few seconds to mock them. Street Fighter 3's defining feature, and what everyone knows it for, is the universal parry, the other cooler defensive option in Street Fighter 3. If you press forward against an attack at the moment of impact within a 10-frame window, or a sixth of a second, you will parry that attack, take no damage, and recover faster in order to counterattack. It feels so damn good to parry in this game, because it's supplemented with a blue flash, a satisfying sound effect, and your character looking sick as you do it. Now Third Strike took this even further by adding the red parry. While you're blocking an attack itself, you can parry within an even tighter 3-frame window, extending the options for experienced players. While this can feel impossible to pull off, this only encouraged the emerging gameplay Third Strike is known for. The new mechanics allowed for new ways of spacing, zoning, baiting, and the skill to read each other. It's at its best when its emerging gameplay features are learned by players like canceling, combos, feinting, and parrying. And this is also held up by one of the most diverse rosters in the franchise. New Generation had 8 original newcomers. You had Alyx, who was originally going to be the main character of Street Fighter 3, Sean, Ibuki, Elena, Oro, Yoon, Necro, and Dudley. Now Second Impact added 4 new characters in total. Our giant attackers are Hugo, a wrestler from Final Fight, Urien, Yang, who was given his own moves in Second Impact, and the return of Akuma. Third Strike, which heavily promoted the return of Chun-Li, added 4 new characters: Makoto, Remy, 12, and Q. This brought the roster to a total of 19 characters. My favorite newcomer of the new generation is Elena. She's a capoeira fighter from Kenya who uses her footwork in her moveset to dance with her foes. Her animations also really showed the power of the Capcom CPS-3. It blows my mind how many frames of animation are used with her, even in her smooth as hell idle stance. I also like her because she's just a joyful and happy character. She just wants to make friends and find the rhythm in each and every one of her opponents, finding the beats in their heads, literally just showing she's here to vibe. Speaking of beats, Third Strike's soundtrack is something else. Its combination of hip-hop, house, jazz, jungle, and techno creates a unique and exciting feel for Third Strike. Hideki Okugawa wanted you to have his beats in your head throughout the soundtrack of Third Strike. Out of any of the games in the series, this soundtrack puts the streets in Street Fighter. The most iconic addition to Third Strike was the Canadian rapper Infinite, as not only being the rapper for the main theme, but also the announcer you hear throughout the game. Once you press start, immediately he proclaims,
"Welcome to the world of Street Fighter 3. Prepare for battle."
And then he breaks it down.
One box could leave you messed up and fractured. Block these uppercuts, they may leave you captured. May the best fighter win and win again. Battle to the top until his life ends.
This is a battle you're going into. Select your character to represent your life, and
Let's get it on that. Select and make your first pick. Let's get it on that. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Get it on that. Choose and pick the best one. Let's get it on that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Fun fact, he was only given a day to write the lyrics for the 3 songs he was chosen to rap on, which was common for rappers in Japanese developed video games at the time, but the results turned out pretty well now that his lines are quoted to this day. The music in Third Strike, like I said, isn't just rap. For example, China Vox represents the glorious return of Chun-Li. But this is her turn. She controls the streets, and she will kick your ass and arrest you if you don't avoid her assault. Our American fighters, Ken and Alex, share a stage. New York to be exact. And looks like someone just put on the jazz. On the coast of Brazil, the hermit Oro awaits. It's nice that he got a jazz band with Brazilian drums to accompany the training session. In London, ooh, hot damn, how does this shit slap so hard? Dudley's mix of house and hip-hop contrasts well with his refined fighting style. While he looks top class, he's a brutal boxer that will groove on you if you don't match his rhythm. Vibe to his dope mix.
This is a stupid dope mix.
While there's a lot of dope mixes, there's also very subtle tracks that fit their mood perfectly. In the rainy neon-lit parts of Hong Kong, that's where Yoon and Yang reside. There's something mysterious lingering in these Chinese streets. Isn't it fitting that Akuma's Jungle has a jungle theme? But what I love about it is how intense the track is. It shows you aren't welcome here. You've awakened the beast. Now you're either going to stand your ground or die to the raging demon. I prefer the arranged version of the soundtrack, as they're the definitive mixes of each song. Each track also includes a round 3 mix, and it's more higher quality than the compressed arcade tracks. Now the main single player is the arcade campaign. Well, yeah, it's an arcade fighting game. You go through 10 stages, and you can choose your opponent for each fight. If you don't feel like dealing with a certain character, just pick the other. There are 2 bonus stages, one where you break an SUV, reminiscent of the Street Fighter II car, except this one explodes. And the other is where Sean shoots basketball at you to parry them. This is a perfect way to practice timing the parry mechanic, especially for those consecutive moves. After fighting your rival, you come face to face with Gil.
The mark of my dignity shall scar thy DNA. Prepare to strike, now!
Gil is an intimidating boss, and as people know is common with arcade games, a quarter muncher. His attacks are brutal. His AI predicts your attacks if you're performing the same tactics. He taunts you when he has the upper hand when you're dizzy, and just when you think the battle is over, and Gil has a full super meter,
Resurrection!
His theme is oppressive, complementing his godlike power and almost futility of opposing him. But you know that if you lose, everyone's future is lost to his plans of world domination. That's why you have to put in another quarter. No matter how much his laughter echoes in your mind, only a true fighter would defeat his ambitions and bring an end to his plan. You must fight for the future.
You can't escape! I don't lose.
After his defeat, well, you get a sigh of relief, as each character has their own ending to their story. The music is calming, but uplifting. Your fight is over for now, so relax and see the results of your efforts. Now, of course, there would be different versions of Street Fighter 3 that were released throughout the years. You have the original arcade version, which, if a city you know has a big arcade scene, most likely it's gonna have it there. You also have the different home versions of Street Fighter 3. The home versions of New Generation and Second Impact came out in 1999 as Street Fighter Double Impact. Third Strike's home version came out on Dreamcast in 2000. This version added the arranged soundtrack that I previously mentioned, with higher quality music, but had some strange differences versus the arcade, and some dreadful input lag. Now, the PS2 port came out in 2004 as standalone in Japan, and in the United States was released in the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection for PS2 and Xbox. This version had both the arcade and arranged soundtracks as an option, and included online play. Only for the Xbox version. In 2011, Iron Galaxy developed a new version of Third Strike called Third Strike Online Edition. This version of Third Strike was based on the PS2 and Xbox versions of the game, has an all-new UI, and more content, like it includes the arranged soundtrack, as well as DLC for new colors, and New Generation and Second Impact soundtrack. This version was also one of the first fighting games to implement rollback netcode, specifically GGPO by Tony Cannon. This was revolutionary for the time, as many fighting games used delay-based netcode, which would slow down the game to get it back to a state both players could continue. This wasn't practical for online fighting games because inputs mattered and players could easily drop a combo or link this way. With GGPO, the game would predict what the player was doing at a particular state, and if the technology got it wrong when it received inputs, it would roll back to that state and fix itself without the player even noticing, because most issues are caused at the frame level. Nowadays, this technology is used in almost every commercial fighting game, and the netcode has improved significantly over time. GGPO itself is open source too. Also, did you know in the home version of Street Fighter 3, you can unlock Gil as a playable character? Yeah. All you have to do is beat arcade mode with every single character. Or if you're on Online Edition, you can just pay an extra $1. Now, Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection is available on all modern consoles and includes all the arcade versions of the mainline Street Fighter games from 1 to Third Strike. However, this version has input lag on consoles and uses the arcade ROMs. Despite that, I think this version is worth it alone just for the bonus mode, which has a collection of high quality artwork, character bios, and never before seen concept art for all the Street Fighter games included. You can spend hours just looking at all the art in the museum. There's also a version that's free to play that most players use to play Third Strike, which is Fightcade. This is an arcade emulator that allows you to play the arcadian of not just Third Strike, but multiple arcade games as long as you dump the ROM. This is one of the easiest ways to play online with anyone, as well as get friends to play. There's even mods that adds training modes as well. But nowadays, Third Strike itself is kind of a goofy game. It's a game that benefited from emergent gameplay. It can be broken in half, but still consists of good players. A series of videos I recommend is the Third Strike Film Room. People use the mechanics and characters in interesting ways, like Tominaga's Kiss of Death combo with Makoto, YSB's control of the ground games, or Kokujin's 50-50 mix-ups with Dudley. Many players have picked apart the game ever since it got competitive attention. Americans didn't really see Third Strike as a competitive game,
but one of the sparks was the US versus Japan exhibition of EVO 2002, where Japanese player Tokido showed off Urian's Aegis Reflector unblockable cross-up.
This showed to pro players that there was more to discover about the game, but 2 years later, something happened that changed the legacy of this game forever. EVO 2004, California State Polytechnic University, the loser's final match of Third Strike. Daigo Umehara and Justin Wong face off for the first time. Considering each player's playstyles, they've been rivals for a very long time, and today is the day they face off. The match starts and it seems normal. Both players are playing footsies, building meter, but Daigo has something up his sleeve. In the final round of the first match, Daigo starts to play aggressively due to Justin's blocking game. He pushes him to the right corner, grabs a few times, but Justin was able to make it out in time. Then Daigo starts zoning him out with some slower Hadoukens, and after trading blows, he's left with one hit point. Justin, thinking he has the game in the bag, unleashes Chun-Li's super art. Then, this happens. Daigo parried every single one of Chun-Li's 15-hit super to a standing ovation of an audience.
Unbelievable! Daigo with a full parry. Combo with the combo and win. Evolution 2004. It's madness. It's unadulterated madness.
To explain how much this took, remember when I discussed parries? Imagine having to do that over a super that comes out this fast, consecutively parry every single hit, have tournament pressure and hearing the audience behind you, as well as execute this perfectly. Daigo couldn't have blocked this super, because he would have just taken chip damage and died from just having one hit point of health left. This was his only option, and he took it. The Japanese were known for practicing how to parry super arts, but outside of that, no one had seen something like what Daigo did on that day. Daigo had been practicing that technique for a long time, and he tried to do it earlier in that day, but failed. Some people in the crowd knew that, and they actually told him not to do it.
Don't do it.
Those Hadoukens, he wasn't just zoning Justin out. He was sending out slow and easy to parry Hadoukens to give him enough meter to do Chun's super art. The Beast didn't do that out and on the spot. He made Justin his pigeon and said, "Bring it on." Most people didn't actually know Daigo's intentions that year. EVO 2004 was apparently going to be his last tournament, and he was going to fully quit fighting games after the event. During the time, he was in his early 20s, and his co-workers in his part-time job have already moved on and found their calling in life. Daigo was just going through the motions and just kept playing fighting games because he was good at them. Like, he was so damn good that apparently he had to get kicked out of Sega Akibara for having a 286 win streak, just because the arcade was closing when he was 13. At the time, esports wasn't as big as it is now. Becoming a professional esports player was completely out of the question. EVO 2004 took place at a college auditorium, and his biggest rise to fame was when he won the World Championships for Street Fighter Alpha 3 in 1997. While sure that was aired on TV, it didn't get him any status. He wanted a turning point in his life. And contrary to popular belief, Daigo didn't actually win that year. He lost to Kenji Obata, the same player he lost to the previous year. But here's the thing, people don't remember KO beating Daigo in 2004. They remember these sounds. because Daigo did the unbelievable. Today, you see multiple people pull off the Daigo parry. I mean, Justin Wong himself gets parried like every day now.
Oh, he Daigo! He Daigo! He Daigo! No!
But just because other players can do it now, it doesn't devalue that moment. Evo Moment 37 inspires people. It reminds them that the impossible is possible. It drives them to want to get better and break their walls. They see that failure is an opportunity for growth and gives them the energy to keep on fighting to improve for the future. While Daigo was playing out a habit, he didn't realize that the turning point was happening right before his eyes. The beast was born, and that beast wasn't going down without a fight, because he was fighting for his future. Now, the funny thing about Third Strike itself is that many of the arcade endings end on setting out for the future. In a way, it gives a finality for certain characters. For example, Ken wins the US Championship surrounded by his friends and family. Elena writes to her friend Narumi and continues her studies in French as an exchange student. Makoto's victory spreads the name of her dojo and many people flock over to learn her style. Remy learns to kill the past by saying one last goodbye to his dead sister, and looks to move on to be a better man than using fighting to cover the void in his heart. Chun-Li rescues Li Fang from Urien and teaches Kung Fu to a new generation. These characters are learning to move on and fight for their future. And the developers were doing the same as well. This game was the last mainline Street Fighter game for a very long time. It took 9 years before we got to see a new mainline entry, Street Fighter 4, which took some mechanics of Street Fighter 3, the roots of Street Fighter 2, as well as some new mechanics and combined them to make a great return to form and revive the fighting game genre for the 7th generation of consoles. But the writing on the wall for the developers was there. New Generation had a budget of 1 billion yen, approximately $8 million, and 3 years of development time, and it only sold 1,000 units. That's minuscule in the arcade industry. It didn't help that coin-op arcades as an industry were dying out at the time, with 3D fighting games like Tekken and Virtua Fighter also being ported to home consoles. Second Impact fared better as well as some success with Third Strike, but it was too little, too late. Street Fighter 3 got crushed by its 3D competitors and the decline of coin-op games. But that all wasn't in vain. The team knew that this was their last chance for Street Fighter 3 to make an impact.
I have heard from developers back in the day, why did they make Street Fighter 3 Third Strike if Second Impact or New Generation were not successful? And their reasoning was there were several things they wanted to improve upon and characters they wanted to add. This was back in the day when the budget for games and the way it was consolidated was a lot different than nowadays. So they literally did it because they wanted to.
Street Fighter Third Strike wasn't the financially successful game Capcom was looking for, but its legacy is still talked about to this day. After 23 years, people are still playing Third Strike. Its mechanics have inspired multiple franchises and norms in fighting games to this day, and at the time, while it was ignored, no one can deny that it changed fighting games forever.
I consider Street Fighter 3 Third Strike to be the greatest fighting game ever made. It's the nervousness between you and your opponent that gives me joy. You have to guess what the next move is by your opponent. That was the most fun thing about the game. It was so enjoyable.
In this world, there's heroes and there's legends. Heroes get remembered, but legends never die. Follow your heart and fight for the future.
Make the first move, so what's it gonna be? You're trapped in a new world of Street Fighter 3, fight for the future. So what's it gonna be? The Third Strike, y'all, in Street Fighter 3. Make the first move, so what's it gonna be? You're trapped in a new world of Street Fighter 3, fight for the future. So what's it gonna be? The Third Strike, y'all, in Street Fighter 3.
We await your return, warrior.
So what's it gonna be? You're trapped in a new world, Street Fighter 3. The third chapter, so what's it gonna be? Trapped in a new world, Street Fighter 3. Make your first move, So what's